The dining table was always meant to be a place of warmth in Armin's family. For years it had been the heart of their home. Steaming plates of biryani, the clatter of glasses, the hum of conversations that drifted late into the night. But on this evening the air was heavy, almost suffocating. Armin walked in expecting another routine family dinner, never imagining that the ground beneath him was about to give way. His father, gray at the temples and still carrying the authority of a man who built a business from scratch, sat at the head of the table. Beside him were Armin's elder brother, Saqib, and younger sister, Nadia. The seats were arranged almost formally, as though this wasn't dinner but some kind of meeting. Armin's chest tightened, but he smiled anyway, pulling out a chair. "Armin, sit down," his father said, his tone clipped. Something in the voice struck him. There was no warmth, no casual ease. It was the tone his father used when firing a worker or negotiating a harsh deal. Armin lowered himself into the chair slowly, searching each of their faces. Nadia avoided his gaze, staring at the tablecloth. Saqib wore that smirk, the one Armin hated, the smirk that told him something cruel was about to follow. His mother brought in a tray of food, but she too wouldn't look him in the eye. A sinking feeling twisted in his stomach. His father cleared his throat. "We've made a decision regarding the restaurant." Armin's eyes flickered. "A decision? Without me?" Saqib leaned forward, his gold wristwatch catching the light. "Don't take it the wrong way, Armin. It's for your own good." "For my own good?" Armin repeated slowly, as if tasting the bitterness of the words. "What exactly are you talking about?" His father folded his hands. "The papers have been signed. Your name is no longer on the restaurant's ownership documents." The world tilted. Armin blinked, certain he'd misheard. "What did you just say?" Nadia finally glanced at him, guilt flashing in her eyes before she looked away again. His father's voice carried on, steady, unmoved. "We've decided it's best if Saqib and I handle everything going forward. You'll always be family, but business is different." Armin's throat went dry. He gripped the edge of the table. "But I've worked there since I was a teenager. I gave up college to keep that place running when no one else was willing. My name is part of that restaurant's soul." "That's the problem," Saqib interrupted, smirk widening. "You're too sentimental, too soft. You think with your heart, not your head. Business doesn't work like that. We need leaders who can be ruthless when required. You're more suited to, well, something simple. Maybe managing supplies, not ownership." The humiliation landed like a slap. His own brother, speaking to him like he was some useless outsider. Armin turned to his mother, desperate. "Ami, you knew about this?" Her eyes glistened, but she lowered her gaze, fiddling with the corner of her dupatta. It's for your own good, Beta. We don't want you burdened with responsibilities you can't handle." Armin's chest burned. "Burdened? I carried that burden when no one else did. Do you remember the nights I slept in the kitchen just to keep the ovens running? Do you remember when I took loans in my name to pay salaries, while Saqib was off showing off in Dubai?" Saqib slammed his fist against the table. "Watch your tongue. I was networking, building contacts, expanding our reach. You're nothing but a glorified worker who thinks loyalty is enough. This is why you'll never understand business." Every word was a knife. Armin looked around the table, his family's faces blurry through the sting of tears he refused to shed. Betrayal pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. He felt small, cornered, and utterly alone. His father's voice softened, though it cut just as deeply. "Armin, you'll thank us one day. You don't have the sharpness for leadership. You're kind, yes, but kindness is weakness in our world. Let Saqib carry the family name forward. You should think of your own path." "My own path?" Armin whispered. "The restaurant was my path, our path, and you've just erased me from it." For a long, suffocating moment, silence hung. Then Nadia spoke, her voice trembling. "Maybe this is better, Bai. At least this way you won't have to fight with Saqib all the time. Peace is worth something too." Armin stared at her, a hollow laugh escaping his throat. "Peace you call betrayal peace?" The food sat untouched in front of them, the aroma suddenly sickening. Armin pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. He stood slowly, his hands trembling, but his voice low, steady and icy. "I see now. To you I was never family in business, just a worker, just a convenient tool. You talk about being ruthless? Fine. Remember this moment when ruthlessness comes knocking at your door." Saqib chuckled mockingly. Empty words from someone who just lost everything. But Armin didn't rise to the bait. He looked at his father, then at his mother, letting the silence cut deeper than any argument could. His heart felt as though it had been carved out of his chest, but somewhere beneath the devastation, something else stirred, something colder, sharper. He straightened his shoulders. "Enjoy your victory," he said quietly, "but don't mistake silence for weakness." And with that, he walked out of the dining room, the weight of betrayal pressing on him with every step. Behind him, the voices resumed, Saqib mocking, Nadia whispering, his father sighing heavily. But Armin didn't turn back. At that table, they had taken his name, his dignity, his place in the family legacy. Yet as he stepped out into the cool night air, a strange clarity filled him. They thought they had stripped him of everything. But what they had really done was set something in motion they would never be able to stop. The stars above blinked coldly as Armin clenched his fists. The restaurant was no longer his, but the fire inside him told him this was only the beginning. The night after the betrayal, Armin couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed staring at the ceiling, the words echoing endlessly in his mind. Too soft, too sentimental, not business-minded. Every syllable cut deeper than the last. Sleep never came, only memories. His life, once intertwined with the family restaurant, replayed itself in flashes, not like a movie, but like scars resurfacing one by one. He remembered being 17, just out of school. Most kids his age were filling out college applications, dreaming of degrees and careers. But Armin? He was standing behind the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, sweat dripping into his collar as he flipped kebabs over an open flame. His father had fallen ill that summer. The accounts were overdue and workers threatened to walk out without pay. Armin didn't think twice. He postponed his studies, promising himself it would be just for a year. A year became two. Two became forever. He remembered the faces of the staff, the older cooks who clapped him on the back, whispering, "You saved us, Beta. Without you, this place would have closed." Those words fueled him through nights when exhaustion blurred his vision. But when he turned to his father for recognition, he was met only with stern nods, never praise. "Don't expect applause for doing your duty," his father used to say. Duty. That word chained him tighter than any lock. He thought of the winter when the restaurant nearly went bankrupt. The suppliers refused to deliver without advance payment. His brother Saqib was nowhere to be found, off vacationing in Malaysia with friends. His father sat at home, too proud to beg the bank for another loan. So Armin did what no one else dared. He signed papers himself, borrowing money in his own name. At 21, he tied himself to debt, just so the ovens could stay warm and the waiters could feed their families. He remembered the day the restaurant reopened after that crisis. Customers trickling in again, the staff returning with relief in their eyes. His mother hugged him briefly, whispering, "Allah bless you." But at the table that night, his father announced, "We are back on our feet, thanks to my leadership and Saqib's connections." Armin had sat there silently, swallowing bitterness with every bite of food. That silence, and it became his constant companion. Another memory burned bright, the night of the fire. A faulty gas line sparked flames in the kitchen and chaos exploded. Workers ran out, neighbors shouted, and smoke filled the street. But Armin rushed inside, dragging heavy extinguishers, coughing until his chest felt like it would collapse. He burned his hands, putting out the last of the flames, skin blistering and raw. The fire department later declared that his quick action had saved not just the restaurant, but the entire building. He never forgot standing in the emergency room, bandaged, exhausted, waiting for some word of gratitude. Saqib had walked in hours later, shaking his head. "You're reckless. What if you had died? We would have lost both you and the restaurant." No thank you. No acknowledgement of sacrifice, only criticism. And yet Armin stayed. He stayed because the restaurant wasn't just brick and mortar to him. It was the smell of spices that clung to his childhood clothes, the sound of clinking plates that had been his lullaby, the laughter of customers who called him by name. The restaurant was his identity. His blood was in its walls, his sweat in its floors. But in his family's eyes, he was never more than a shadow. He thought of Saqib's flashy entrances, rolling up in luxury cars, throwing parties in the banquet hall, taking credit for deals Armin had closed quietly behind the scenes. Customers often shook Armin's hand, praising his warmth, saying, "This place feels like home because of you." But whenever relatives gathered, his father raised his glass to Saqib instead. "My eldest, the future of our business." Armin had learned to smile through the humiliation. He had learned to nod, to accept invisibility. Each dismissal carved another wound, but he buried them deep, convincing himself that one day loyalty would be rewarded. And now? Now those wounds throbbed open again, bleeding fresh. Armin sat up in bed, gripping his knees. He realized his entire youth had been bartered away for a legacy that was never meant for him. While others his age built careers, traveled, loved freely, he had been chained to an oven, to accounts, to debt. And the people he had sacrificed everything for had turned around and erased his name, smiling as they did it. His mind drifted to a smaller, almost forgotten memory. He was 20, still fresh-faced, when a customer once asked him, "Why don't you open your own place? You have the talent, the passion." Armin had laughed softly and replied, "This is my place. This is my family's. Why would I ever leave?" Now the irony burned. The place he once called his own had spat him out like he was nothing. He rose and paced the room, heart hammering. The betrayal at the dinner table wasn't just about papers. It was about erasing decades of sacrifice, dismissing every sleepless night, every scar, every ounce of devotion. They had not only stripped him of ownership, but also mocked the very foundation of his identity. But something unexpected stirred beneath the pain. As much as the wounds bled, as much as the betrayal suffocated him, there was also a simmering clarity. For the first time in years, Armin saw his family not through the eyes of a loyal son or dutiful brother, but through the eyes of a man wronged. He saw Saqib's greed, the hunger for power masked as ambition. He saw his father's arrogance, the pride that refused to acknowledge anyone's worth but his own. He saw Nadia's silence, complicity disguised as peacekeeping. And he saw his mother's weakness, the refusal to defend her son when it mattered most. Every wound told him the same truth: he had never belonged. He had only been tolerated as long as he was useful. The thought should have broken him. Instead, it hardened him. Armin sat back down on his bed, hands clenched. The memories, once chains, now became fuel. He had been too soft, too sentimental, too loyal. That was their verdict. But they had overlooked one thing. A man who has given everything has nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous of all. The night grew quiet. The house slept, but Armin remained awake, staring at the faint glow of dawn outside his window. His wounds would never heal, not because they couldn't, but because he no longer wanted them to. They would serve as reminders, as sharpened edges carving him into someone new. For years he had carried his family's legacy on his back. Now he would carry something else: resolve, the kind that grows not from love, but from betrayal. And as the first rays of sunlight touched his face, Armin whispered to himself, "You think you've broken me, but you've only begun to see what I can become." The morning sun lit up the street outside the restaurant, but for Armin it felt dim and hollow. He stood across the road for a long while, staring at the building that had once been his pride. The familiar signboard with the family name still hung above the entrance, though he knew deep down it wouldn't remain for long. He hadn't planned to come. After the stormy dinner, part of him had wanted to disappear, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the people who had cut him so easily from their legacy. Yet his feet brought him here, as if habit still bound him to these walls. The restaurant wasn't just a workplace. It was a piece of his soul. He couldn't resist one last glance. Inside, the staff bustled. He saw workers he had trained, cooks who had once trusted him with every decision. Some looked up as he entered, surprise flickering in their eyes. "Armin bhai," one of them whispered, relief in his voice, as if finally someone sensible had arrived. But then Saqib's sharp tone sliced through the air. "What are you doing here?" Saqib stood near the counter, papers in hand, his wife Samira beside him. She was impeccably dressed, her scarf pinned neatly, her bangles clinking as she flipped through documents. The smug curve of her lips was unmistakable. "I came to see how things are running," Armin replied evenly. "Just making sure of what?" Saqib cut in, stepping closer. "That we're capable without you? Don't worry, little brother. Everything is under control." Samira let out a light laugh, the kind that wasn't laughter at all but mockery wrapped in sweetness. "It's better this way, Armin. You can finally rest. Business is stressful work. Leave it to those who understand it." Armin's eyes narrowed. "Papers? What papers?" Saqib's grin widened as he waved the folder. "Since you're so curious, let me enlighten you. The restaurant will be rebranded. A fresh start, a modern name. No more old-fashioned family business feel. From next month, it will carry Samira's name. She'll be the new face of the restaurant. The words struck harder than the betrayal at the dinner table. Not only had they erased him, but now they were handing his life's work, the work he had built brick by brick, to someone who had never lifted a finger for it. Samira wasn't family by blood, and yet she was being raised above him, elevated to the pedestal he had sacrificed for. He looked around the hall, his chest heavy. The decor he had chosen, the menu he had curated, the very aroma in the air, all of it was about to be stripped away, painted over with someone else's name. "You're serious," he whispered, his voice low, almost trembling. Samira tilted her head. "Of course. A woman's touch will bring sophistication. People will forget the old name soon enough." Armin's jaw tightened. He turned to Saqib. "And you? You think this is fair?" "Fair?" Saqib chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. "Life isn't fair, Armin. Don't act like a child. You should be grateful. We're saving you from responsibilities you clearly can't handle. Go, find a job somewhere. Something simple. You're good with people. Maybe a cashier or a supply manager. But ownership?" His smirk deepened. "That was never your league." Laughter spilled from his lips, and Samira joined in, the sound echoing cruelly against the walls that had once sheltered Armin's dreams. For a moment, Armin felt the old urge rise. To defend himself, to shout, to list every sacrifice he had made. To remind them of the loans in his name, the burns on his hands, the sleepless nights spent balancing accounts while Saqib enjoyed parties. But the urge passed. What good were words against people who had already chosen to forget? Instead, he stood silent, letting their cruelty hang in the air. He studied them both, memorizing their arrogance, their laughter, the exact expressions they wore as they tore his identity apart. His silence unsettled them. The smirks faltered, if only for a second. Finally, Armin spoke, his voice calm, measured, but cold enough to chill the air. "You think I'm out of my league? Maybe. Or maybe you've mistaken patience for weakness. Mock me all you want, but remember, tides change. And when they do, I won't need to say a word. You'll feel it." Saqib rolled his eyes. "Empty threats. That's all you've ever had." Armin didn't respond. He turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last, yet steadier too. Behind him, he could still hear their voices, mocking, dismissing. But with every footfall, the sting of humiliation transformed into something else. By the time he stepped back onto the street, the anger that had burned in his chest began to harden into steel. He looked up at the signboard once more. Soon, it would bear another name. Soon, everything he had poured into the restaurant would be painted over as though he had never existed. But they didn't realize the danger of erasing a man like him. They didn't realize what they had unleashed. For years, Armin's loyalty had kept him tethered. He had endured slights, insults, dismissals, all in the hope of someday being acknowledged. But now, that hope was gone. In its place was resolve. They had mocked him, told him to find a job, dismissed him as if he were a servant instead of a son. And maybe for now he would walk away quietly, but inside something had shifted forever. His heart no longer bled, it burned. As he walked down the road, past the shops that knew his name, past neighbors who had always associated him with the restaurant, he felt strangely lighter. Stripped of illusion, of false family pride, of empty loyalty, he was finally free to see his family for who they truly were. Saqib greedy and arrogant, Samira calculating and opportunistic, his father blind with pride, his mother silent with weakness, Nadia complicit with her peacekeeping. They had shown him their truth, and now he would find his own. He paused at the corner of the street, taking one last look at the building. "Go ahead," he murmured under his breath. "Repaint it. Rename it. Mock me. Laugh at me. But remember, shadows are quiet until the light shifts. And when it does, you won't even see me coming." With that, he turned away. The final straw had broken whatever tie remained between him and the family legacy. Betrayal no longer wounded him. It armed him. And as he walked toward the unknown, he carried not despair but a sharpened determination that would soon change everything. The days that followed felt strangely hollow. Armin no longer walked toward the restaurant. His footsteps avoided the familiar road as though even glancing at the building would reopen his wounds. He spent his time wandering through the city, trying to make sense of a life stripped of purpose. But even in the quiet streets, the whispers of betrayal clung to him like shadows. One evening, after hours of drifting aimlessly, Armin found himself near the bustling commercial district. Neon signs glowed, Shopkeepers called out to passing customers, and the air smelled of roasted corn mixed with car exhaust. He stopped outside a cafe, its glass windows steaming with warmth. Something in him longed for normalcy even for a moment, so he stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and as he moved toward an empty table, a voice called out behind him. "Armin, is that really you?" He turned, startled. A tall man with neatly trimmed hair and sharp features stood near the counter, a surprised grin on his face. Recognition flickered, and it was Imran Malik, an old acquaintance from school. They hadn't spoken in years. "Imran," Arman said, forcing a small smile. "It's been a long time." Imran strode over, his presence commanding the space around him. He was dressed in a tailored suit, the kind that screamed success. "Too long, my friend. Come sit with me. We have a lot to catch up on." Reluctantly, Armin agreed. They settled into a corner booth, steaming cups of tea placed between them. "So," Imran began, leaning back, "I hear the family restaurant is still running. You're still involved?" The question cut deep. Arman's jaw tightened, but he forced composure. "Not anymore. Things changed." Imran raised an eyebrow. "Changed? That's surprising. I always thought you were the backbone of that place. Everyone knew it was your dedication that kept it alive." Arman gave a short, humorless laugh. "Backbones are invisible, easy to ignore until they're gone." Imran studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Families can be complicated. Believe me, I know." Arman looked at him more closely. "And you? What are you doing these days?" A grin spread across Imran's face. "I run a restaurant chain now. Malik's Kitchen. Maybe you've heard of it?" Arman's eyes widened slightly. Of course he'd heard of it. Malik's Kitchen had been growing rapidly, opening branches across the city. In fact, it was one of the family restaurant's fiercest competitors. "I didn't realize it was yours," Arman admitted. "Oh yes," Imran said, pride in his voice. "Started small, but we've been expanding fast. In fact, I've been scouting for new locations. The right spot can make all the difference, you know?" Arman sipped his tea slowly, his mind stirring with uneasy curiosity. "So business is good?" "Better than good," Imran replied. "But location is always a battle. You wouldn't believe the rent some landlords are demanding. Still, if the spot is right, it's worth it." Something in his words tugged at Arman's thoughts. For the first time in days, his despair lifted just enough for a different feeling to slip in. Intrigue. He leaned forward slightly. "Funny you mention that. The building where our restaurant runs, do you know much about its lease terms?" Imran blinked. "That property. Prime spot. I looked into it once, years ago. I remember the lease was set up in your father's time. Long contract, but not permanent. If I'm not mistaken, the renewal comes up soon." Arman's heart skipped. "You're sure?" "Pretty sure," Imran said with a casual shrug. "I keep tabs on these things." "Why do you ask?" Arman forced his expression into neutrality, though inside his mind was racing. If the lease was indeed expiring, then who controlled its renewal? He remembered the old paperwork, the meetings at the lawyer's office. His father had insisted on handling ownership, but the lease? Yes, the lease had been under Arman's name. It had seemed trivial at the time, a small gesture of trust when he was young. No one had paid it much attention since. If that contract still stood, then legally, the power to renew or refuse lay in his hands. Arman's tea grew cold in front of him as realization settled like a weight in his chest. For the first time since the betrayal, the humiliation didn't sting as much. Instead, a sharper, more dangerous feeling rose within him. Possibility. He looked at Imran, whose expression was curious but cautious. "Just something I remembered. That building. If the lease ends soon, it could change everything for whoever controls it." Imran chuckled. "True enough. If the right person held that card, they could make or break the restaurant there. But from what I know, your family would never let go of that spot. Too valuable." Arman said nothing. He only smiled faintly, letting Imran assume the conversation was casual. But inside, his thoughts were far from casual. They had taken his name off the restaurant. They had mocked him, told him to go find a job, dismissed him like a useless extra. But in their arrogance, had they forgotten whose name still tied the building itself? His silence deepened, not out of weakness but calculation. He knew better than to reveal his intentions now, even to Imran. Instead, he changed the subject, asking about Malik's Kitchen, about Imran's expansion. listening carefully as his old acquaintance described the hunger for a prime central location. Every word was like oil on the fire building inside Armin's chest. By the time they parted ways outside the cafe, Imran clapping him on the shoulder and promising to stay in touch, Armin's mind was already spinning with plans. He walked away slowly, the night air sharp against his skin but his steps purposeful. For the first time since being betrayed, he didn't feel like a victim. He felt like a man holding a hidden weapon, one his family didn't even know existed. He stopped at the corner of the street, staring at the faint glow of the restaurant's sign in the distance. Soon Saqib would plaster Samira's name across it, erasing every trace of Armin's loyalty. But what they didn't know was that the very ground they stood on was still his to give, or to take away. A grim smile touched his lips. They thought they had ended him. They hadn't. They had just handed him the perfect opportunity, and this time he wouldn't waste it. The days after Armin's encounter with Imran passed in a blur, but for the first time in weeks his steps carried weight. No longer drifting aimlessly, he walked with quiet intention. Every memory of humiliation at the family table, his mother's dismissive sigh, Saqib's cruel smirk, Samira's triumphant glance, fueled the fire now burning inside him. They thought they had stripped him of everything. They believed his silence meant surrender. But they had overlooked the one thread still tied to him, the lease of the very building that sheltered their pride and greed. That thread, fragile in appearance, was in truth a chain, and Armin held its key. He began discreetly. His first stop was a law office tucked away in an older part of the city, a place most people overlooked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and leather-bound books. The lawyer, a calm man named Mr. Qureshi, listened as Armin explained the situation. "My family removed me from the business," Armin said, his tone steady, though his hands trembled under the table. "But the building's lease, it's still in my name, correct?" Qureshi adjusted his glasses and flipped through the file Armin had brought. Pages rustled, contracts decades old but still legally binding. After several long minutes, he looked up. "You're right," Qureshi said. "The lease is yours, originally set under your father's arrangement. Renewal is due in less than 3 months. Legally, you hold full authority to extend it, change its terms, or refuse renewal altogether." A slow breath escaped Armin's chest, relief and power intertwining. "And if I refuse renewal?" "Then," Qureshi said, leaning back, "the current occupants and your family will have no legal right to remain. They would be forced to vacate. Whoever you lease it to next would take possession." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. For a moment, Armin felt the ghost of hesitation. Was this truly what he wanted? To strip his own family of the roof under which he had bled and sweated for years? But the image of Saqib laughing in his face returned, washing away his doubt. "Yes," Armin whispered. "That's exactly what I'll do." From that moment, the plan unfolded in silence. He contacted Imran again, this time with a carefully measured tone. Over lunch in a quiet restaurant, Armin spoke plainly. "I control the lease of my family's building," he said, his voice low. "It will expire soon. I intend not to renew it for them. But if you're interested—" He paused, watching Imran's reaction. Imran's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're offering it to me?" Armin gave a single nod. "On fair terms. But discretion is critical. My family must know nothing until it's too late." Imran leaned back, considering. "You've always been the quiet type, Armin. Never thought you'd make such a move." Armin's lips curved in a faint smile. "Neither do they." Negotiations began quietly. Drafts of contracts slid across polished tables, lawyers exchanged clauses, and timelines were set. Each step felt like a hammer striking the foundation of the restaurant his family guarded so jealously. They celebrated at home, ignorant of the fact that beneath their feet the ground was already shifting. At night, Armin sat alone in his modest apartment, papers spread across the table. The legal documents, once confusing, now became weapons in his hands. Each signature he penned was a stroke of justice written in ink, invisible to those who had once called him weak. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, his family carried on as though nothing had changed. Saqib boasted about the upcoming rebranding under Samira's name. His mother praised Samira's business sense as though Armin had never existed. To them, the war was won. They had silenced the quiet son who never raised his voice. But Armin's silence had transformed into something far more dangerous. One afternoon, he returned to the restaurant under the guise of a customer. The familiar aroma of spices and grilled meat lingered in the air, but now it felt alien. He sat in a corner, watching Saqib bark orders and Samira strut proudly among the staff. They didn't even notice him. He had become invisible to them. And yet in his pocket lay the signed agreement that would evict them all. His chest tightened with a mix of triumph and sorrow. This place had once been his entire life, a symbol of his sacrifices. Soon it would belong to someone else, to a rival chain no less. The contrast struck him, their arrogance at its peak while his hidden power grew steadily, preparing to crush them. The suspense deepened as Malik's kitchen quietly began preparations. Teams scouted the location, interior designers drafted plans, and supply chains adjusted schedules. All of it happened under a veil of secrecy, hidden from the family's eyes. Armin coordinated from the shadows, careful never to leave a trace. Burners' phones, private meetings, coded messages with Qureshi and Imran. Every step was cloaked. The fewer people who knew, the better. Sometimes, late at night, he would pause, staring at the papers, wondering if he had become the very thing he hated. Cold, calculating, merciless. But then he would remember his father's face, stern but proud, telling him once, "A man's worth isn't in loudness. It's in what he can build and or destroy, without anyone knowing until it's too late." Perhaps his father had known this day would come. The deadline for the lease drew closer. His family, oblivious, poured money into renovations and marketing campaigns. Samira's face appeared on flyers, her name written in bold letters across social media posts. The restaurant was already being reshaped in her image. Each poster Armin saw felt like another knife in his back. But instead of weakening him, it only hardened his resolve. Soon, he thought, very soon. The contrast was now unbearable. Their laughter, their boasts, their belief that they had buried him, all while he held the shovel ready to turn their triumph into a grave. And through it all he said nothing. Not a word of warning, not a sign of the storm gathering just beyond their sight. When the final lease documents were signed in Qureshi's office, transferring renewal rights directly to Malik's kitchen, Armin set the pen down with steady hands. "It's done," Qureshi said softly. Armin stood, the weight in his chest lifting. He wasn't the forgotten son anymore. He was the architect of their downfall. As he walked out into the fading evening light, the city buzzing around him, Armin's lips curved in a cold smile. His family thought they had won, but their victory was nothing more than a fragile illusion, one that would shatter the moment Malik's kitchen revealed its new address. And when that day came, Armin would be there, silent, no longer watching as justice finally arrived. The night of the grand rebranding arrived with glittering lights and loud laughter. The family restaurant, once modest and warm, had been transformed into something ostentatious. Golden drapes hung across the entrance, bright banners announced the new name, Samira's Fine Dining, and a red carpet rolled out to welcome relatives, business associates, and local dignitaries. Inside, chandeliers glimmered. Tables groaned under the weight of lavish dishes prepared to impress. Waiters in crisp uniforms carried trays of mocktails, their polished shoes tapping against the marble floor. The entire place screamed of victory, their victory. Armin stood near the entrance, invited but not truly welcomed. He had come not for celebration but to witness. He wore a plain suit, blending into the crowd while his siblings paraded like royalty. Saqib, his chest puffed, shook hands with uncles and cousins, boasting of the family's bold new direction. His mother sat at the head table, glowing with pride, whispering to the aunts about how Samira's intelligence had saved the restaurant. Samira herself floated from group to group, every inch the new matriarch of the business, her laughter echoing over the music. When Armin approached, conversation shifted. Some relatives smiled politely, others looked at him with pity, and then like clockwork the whispers began. "There he is, and the one they cut out. Poor boy, after all his years of hard work. They say he couldn't handle the pressure. That's why they had to push him aside." Armin caught every word, each syllable slicing into him like glass. But his face betrayed nothing. He sat quietly at a corner table, a shadow among the bright lights, his silence deeper than ever. At one point, Saqib noticed him and smirked. With a glass raised high, he called across the hall, "Brother, how good of you to join us." I was beginning to think you'd forgotten how to celebrate success. Laughter rippled among the relatives. Armand lifted his glass of water in response, his expression unreadable. Samira, never one to waste an opportunity, added with a grin, "We'll save you a seat in the audience when we expand. Who knows, maybe one day you'll apply for a job here. We could always use more waiters." The cruelty stung, but Armand's composure never cracked. He only nodded slightly, sipping his water, letting them bask in their imagined triumph. As the evening carried on, the family's arrogance swelled. Toasts were made to Samira's vision, speeches were given about the future of the restaurant, and Saqib bragged about their growing reputation. Every word dripped with self-congratulation, their egos towering higher with each passing hour. But while they celebrated, subtle murmurs began weaving through the room. Businessmen in tailored suits whispered in corners, eyebrows raised. An elderly uncle leaned toward another relative and muttered, "Have you heard? Something's changing with the property." "Changing? What do you mean?" "They say the lease is up, that someone else may have their hands on it already." The whispers spread like smoke, faint at first, then stronger. The family, too busy congratulating themselves, noticed nothing. But Armand, seated quietly, heard every word. His lips curved in the faintest smile, though he hid it behind his glass. A cousin approached him hesitantly. "Armand Bhai, is it true? About the building?" Armand's gaze was calm, his voice measured. "You'll see soon enough." The cousin frowned, uncertain, then drifted back into the crowd. As the dinner continued, relatives grew bolder with their questions. One uncle leaned toward Saqib, saying, "I heard rumors about the lease. Surely that's not true." Saqib barked a laugh. "Lease, please. We've had that property for decades. My father built this place. No one can touch it," Samira added smugly. "People love to gossip when they see success. Let them talk." Their arrogance silenced doubt, but only for a moment. The whispers did not die. They grew louder, feeding on one another. Aunts exchanged worried glances. Cousins asked more pointed questions. The glittering celebration began to feel strained, like a balloon filled too tightly, moments away from bursting. Armand observed it all in silence, his patience sharpening like a blade. He thought back to the long nights he had worked in that very building, scrubbing pans until his fingers bled, keeping the kitchen alive when suppliers threatened to cut them off. He had built this place with sweat, sacrifice, and loyalty. Now they had turned it into a stage for their arrogance, and he would be the one to pull the curtain down. Toward the end of the night, Samira raised her glass for a final toast. "Tonight," she declared, her voice ringing across the hall, "marks the beginning of our new legacy. From this day forward, Samira's fine dining will shine as the jewel of this city, and to those who doubted us, even in our own family, let this success be the answer." Every relative applauded. Saqib smirked at Armand across the room, savoring his silence as defeat. But Armand's silence was not defeat. It was patience. He stood slowly, the applause still echoing. For a moment, all eyes turned toward him, expecting perhaps a bitter outburst, a plea for recognition. Instead, he simply set his glass down and said softly, "Enjoy this night. You'll remember it." The words, simple yet heavy, lingered in the air. A hush followed, confusion rippling through the crowd. Samira scoffed, waving him off. Always the dramatic one. Ignore him and he doesn't understand business. Laughter resumed, the music swelled again, and the party continued. But beneath the golden lights and forced cheer, unease had begun to seep in. Relatives whispered more urgently, some glancing at Armand with curiosity, others at Saqib with doubt. Armand left quietly before the night ended. He stepped into the cool air outside, the muffled sounds of celebration fading behind him. The banners fluttered. The golden drapes swayed in the wind, but in his mind they already looked like decorations for a funeral. The family thought tonight marked the peak of their power. In truth, it was the beginning of their fall. Armand walked away, his footsteps steady, his patience unbroken. The time for revelation was near. The morning sun rose warm and golden, but for the family it promised glory. They bustled out of their cars in front of the restaurant, dressed in their finest clothes, prepared for the official first day of Samira's fine dining. This was supposed to be the dawn of their legacy, the day guests would pour in and marvel at the transformation. Saqib straightened his tie with pride. Samira smoothed her silk dupatta, her chin held high. Their mother clutched prayer beads, whispering thanks for the success her daughter-in-law had brought. Relatives followed behind them, eager to witness the grand opening. But as they approached the entrance, the air shifted. The doors were locked. Heavy chains crisscrossed the handles, sealed with a thick padlock. And above the familiar entrance, workers on ladders were already stripping down the bright gold banners that read, Samira's Fine Dining. In their place, new boards gleamed with bold lettering, Malik's Kitchen, coming soon. The color drained from Samira's face. Saqib froze, staring in disbelief. Their mother gasped loudly, clutching her chest. What is this? Samira stammered, her voice breaking. Who dares? One of the neighbors across the street leaned on his shop counter, shaking his head. Didn't you hear? The lease was up. Someone else has taken it. The relatives murmured, confusion and unease spreading. Some took out their phones, snapping pictures. The proud family, who just last night boasted of their empire, now stood humiliated on the sidewalk. Saqib stormed toward the workers. Stop right now. This is our restaurant. One of the men climbed down calmly. Not anymore, Sahib. We've got the legal documents. Lease has been transferred. Malik's Kitchen owns this property now. Samira's voice rose shrill. This can't be. We invested everything, our money, our name. Who would dare do this to us? And then slowly a figure stepped forward from the crowd. Arman. He wore no arrogance, no show of triumph, only a calmness that cut sharper than any rage. His eyes were steady as they met theirs, his posture composed as if this moment had been carved into destiny itself. You're looking at him, Arman said quietly. Silence fell. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The hammering of nails above, the muttering of neighbors, even the honking traffic nearby faded. All eyes turned to Arman. Saqib's face contorted with fury. You did this? Arman's lips curved faintly. I did. Samira stepped forward, trembling with indignation. You snake! After everything we've built. Everything I built, Arman cut in, his tone icy but controlled. The nights I spent in that kitchen, the suppliers I begged when debts piled high, the hours I sacrificed while you mocked me. All of it I built, and you erased my name as though I was nothing. His words carried across the crowd, every syllable sharp as glass. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. Neighbors nodded knowingly, some whispering, he's right. Everyone remembers. Saqib jabbed a finger at him, his voice cracking. We removed you because you were weak. Because you had no vision. Arman's gaze didn't waver. Weak? Or was I simply not ruthless enough for you? You wanted my silence, my loyalty, my hands to work while you basked in the credit, and when you thought you no longer needed me, you cast me aside. Samira tried to interrupt, but Arman raised his hand, silencing her. You thought you took everything, but you forgot one thing. He gestured to the building, the workers now bolting the last of Malik's Kitchen signs into place. The ground beneath your feet was still mine to give, or to take away. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. His family's faces twisted in horror as realization dawned. Their mother clutched Saqib's arm, eyes wide with disbelief. Arman, you wouldn't. This is your family. For the first time, Arman's calm cracked, not with anger, but with sorrow. Family. A family doesn't betray its own. A family doesn't strip its son's name for their own greed. You left me no choice. The crowd was thick now. Neighbors and shopkeepers abandoning their stalls to watch the spectacle. The proud family who had mocked Arman's quiet nature was now a public spectacle of disgrace. Phones recorded their shouting, their desperation. Samira lunged forward, tears of rage spilling down her cheeks. You'll regret this, Arman. You've ruined everything. Arman stepped closer, his voice low but cutting enough to silence her. No, I've simply given you what you gave me, nothing. You taught me that loyalty means humiliation, that silence means weakness. Now you will learn what silence hides, power. The words landed like hammer blows. Saqib's voice shook, torn between anger and despair. How could you betray us? Arman's eyes burned cold. Betrayal? You betrayed me first. This is justice. The last banner of Samira's Fine Dining was stripped away then, fluttering to the ground like a fallen crown. Above the entrance, the bold new sign gleamed. Malik's Kitchen. Final. Irreversible. Neighbors applauded quietly, some openly smirking at the downfall of the arrogant family. Relatives avoided eye contact, ashamed to have celebrated with them only hours ago. The humiliation was complete. Arman turned, his back to the family, and began to walk away. But before he left, he paused, his voice carrying one last time. You wanted me forgotten. Now you'll be remembered, not for triumph, but for the day your pride destroyed you." And with that, he walked down the street, the clamor of chaos behind him. Saqib shouted. Samira wept, their mother begged, but nothing could undo the truth now carved in stone. The restaurant they had stolen from Arman was gone, taken not by strangers, but by the very son they had cast aside. For the first time in years, Arman's steps felt light, not because revenge was sweet, but because justice had finally spoken in a voice even they could not silence, and in that silence his power was absolute. The days following the devastating reveal were nothing short of a storm. Word spread faster than fire in dry grass. The once proud family who had boasted of their new legacy had been ousted from their own restaurant by the very son they cast aside. Neighbors gossiped, shopkeepers chuckled, and relatives who had cheered their victory at the rebranding dinner now whispered in pity, or worse, ridicule. Within a week, creditors began to call. Saqib had borrowed heavily to fund Samira's lavish renovation plans, believing the restaurant would generate more than enough profit to cover the loans. But with the property lost, the debts remained. Harsh letters arrived daily, stamped in red, demanding repayment. Samira sat in the living room, surrounded by unpaid bills, her eyes swollen from crying. "How could this happen?" she whispered again and again. Saqib slammed his fist against the table, veins bulging in his neck. "Because he betrayed us. Arman destroyed everything." Their mother, weary and pale, shook her head. "No, Saqib, we destroyed ourselves. We pushed him out, mocked him, and now Allah has shown us the price." But Saqib refused to listen. His pride, cracked and bleeding, still clung to denial. "He tricked us. He couldn't build anything on his own, so he stole it back." Yet outside their home, the truth was undeniable. Workers who had once been loyal began quitting one by one, unwilling to be associated with a family drowning in shame. Relatives who had happily attended the rebranding celebration now avoided their calls. At social gatherings, whispers followed them like shadows. "Did you hear? They lost everything overnight." Arrogant people, karma caught them. They cut their own son's throat, and he was the one who buried them. Samira could no longer show her face at the market without hearing laughter behind her back. Even her friends, once eager to bask in her success, now kept their distance. At home, arguments exploded daily. Saqib accused Samira of pushing too hard with her name. Samira accused him of being careless with finances. Their mother wept, begging them to stop, but their house had turned into a battlefield. Meanwhile, Arman's life began to take a different shape entirely. At Malik's kitchen headquarters, he was welcomed not as a forgotten son, but as a man of vision. Imran introduced him to the staff with respect. "This is Arman, the man whose strength made this new chapter possible." For the first time, Arman felt what he had never known in his own family: recognition. His ideas were heard, his opinions valued. He wasn't mocked for being too soft, but admired for his patience, his deep knowledge of how a restaurant truly ran. With his insight, Malik's kitchen quickly transformed the location into one of its busiest branches. Customers poured in, curious to see the rival chain that had replaced the once beloved family restaurant. And when they tasted the food, experienced the service, they returned again and again. Arman walked the familiar halls of the building, now adorned with Malik's kitchen branding, and felt no regret. This was no longer the place of his humiliation. It had become the stage of his quiet triumph. Financially, too, his fortunes changed. As part of the lease agreement, Imran offered him a generous share of profits from the branch. Within months, Arman paid off his modest debts, moved into a better apartment, and finally lived without the shadow of poverty that had haunted him for years. The contrast could not have been sharper. While his family sank deeper into chaos, Arman rose steadily, carried by respect and stability. News of his success spread, reaching the same relatives who had once mocked him. Invitations began to trickle in, dinners, weddings, casual visits. But Arman responded politely, never cruelly, and rarely accepted. He had learned the value of distance. Back in his family's home, desperation grew. One by one, relatives who had invested in Saqib's promises demanded their money back. Workers filed complaints for unpaid wages. Creditors threatened legal action. The house that once buzzed with pride now echoed with shouting and despair. One evening, Samira broke down completely. "We've lost everything, Saqib. The restaurant, the respect, even our family's name. We can't show our faces anywhere." Saqib sat in silence, his head in his hands. The fire in him had dimmed. His arrogance, once so loud, was now reduced to bitter silence. Their mother, sitting quietly in the corner, spoke with a trembling voice. "Do you see now? Arman was the heart of this family, and we cut him out. We planted this poison ourselves." Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Across town, Arman sat at his desk reviewing reports from Malik's kitchen, sipping tea in peace. He had no need for vengeance anymore. It had already unfolded without him lifting another finger. His family had collapsed under the weight of their own pride, while he had risen simply by stepping aside and letting truth do its work. But even in his peace, Arman carried no gloating smile. There was no joy in their downfall, only a solemn understanding. What they suffered was not revenge, and it was consequence. And so while they scrambled, drowning in debts and whispers, Arman thrived quietly. His days were filled with purpose, his nights with rest. He had discovered something greater than revenge: freedom. The contrast was undeniable. Their world, once gilded with false pride, lay in ruins, while his life, once dismissed as insignificant, now stood firm, steady, and respected. The son they had erased had become the man they could never surpass. It was late in the evening when the knock came at Arman's apartment door. He wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But the knocking persisted, softer this time, almost hesitant. With a sigh, he opened the door. His mother stood there. She looked older, frailer, as though the weight of the past months had aged her years. Her dupatta was loosely draped, her eyes red from crying. For a long moment she simply stared at her son, lips trembling before whispering, "Arman, may I come in?" Arman hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered quietly, looking around the modest but well-kept apartment. There was pride hidden in her glance, though it was buried beneath sorrow. She sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands together. "I don't know where else to go," she began, her voice breaking. "Your brothers? They're drowning us. Debts, shame, anger. And She paused, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I was part of it too. I let them take your name off. I told myself it was for your good. But the truth is I was weak. I didn't fight for you when I should have." Arman sat across from her, his jaw clenched. "You didn't just stay silent, Ami. You agreed with them. You looked at me and said I wasn't strong enough. Do you know what that did to me?" She buried her face in her hands. "I know, Beta. Every night I think of that moment. I betrayed my own son." The room grew heavy with silence, broken only by her sobs. Arman wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, but a wall of old wounds held him back. Then came another knock, loud, impatient. Before Arman could move, the door burst open and in walked Saqib and Samira, followed by the younger brother. Their faces were flushed, not with shame, but with anger. "There you are," Saqib spat, pointing a finger. "Sitting in comfort while we suffer. You've ruined us, Arman. Do you feel proud?" Arman's mother turned sharply. "Saqib, stop. This is not why we came." But Saqib ignored her. "You call yourself a son? You stabbed your family in the back for money. You're selfish, Arman. You always were." Samira sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "He's enjoying this, can't you see? Look at his apartment, his smug face. He thinks he's better than us." Arman rose slowly to his feet. His voice, when it came, was calm but laced with steel. "Better than you? No, but different from you, yes. I never wanted this, Saqib. I never wanted to take anything from you." "Lies," the younger brother shouted. "You planned this from the start." Arman's eyes burned as he finally let years of suppressed pain spill out. "From the start? From the start, I gave everything. I worked when you slept, I stayed when you left. I carried that restaurant on my shoulders while you all played at being kings. And what did I get? Mockery, betrayal. You told me I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't strong, that I should disappear, so I did. And look what happened." His mother sobbed harder, clutching her chest. "Please, don't fight." But Arman's voice rose, years of silence breaking like a dam. "You call me selfish? I wanted one thing, respect. A place at the table I bled for. You denied me that, laughed at me, erased me. I didn't bring you down, you did. Karma only handed you what you gave me." Saqib's face reddened, but his words faltered. Samira tried to speak, but Arman's piercing gaze silenced her. Arman turned to his mother, his voice softer but trembling. "Ami, I never wanted revenge. I wanted to belong. That's all. But when you all shut the door on me, I had no choice but to walk away. The rest, it was never my plan. It was yours." His mother covered her face, shoulders shaking with grief. "Forgive me, Beta, please. Forgive me." Armin's throat tightened. Forgiveness, not the word, cut deeper than all their insults. Could he give it? Did he have it in him? He looked at her, at the woman who had once held his hand through childhood, who had stood silently when he was cast out. He wanted to say yes, but the chasm between them felt too wide. "Ami," he said at last, voice breaking, "I don't hate you, but I can't go back. The trust, it's gone. Maybe one day wounds heal, but not now." Saqib scoffed, trying to mask his own trembling hands. "Fine, stay on your high horse. Don't come crawling to us when your new friends betray you too." Arman met his brother's eyes, steady and unshaken. "If they do, I'll stand on my own. Something you never learned to do." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Saqib had no reply. Their mother stood slowly, wiping her tears. She touched Armin's arm lightly, her fingers trembling. "I understand," she whispered. "Even if you cannot forgive me now, know that my heart will always regret." Arman closed his eyes briefly, swallowing hard, then nodded. It was not reconciliation, but it was truth. As his family left, Saqib glaring, Samira muttering curses, the younger brother silent, his mother paused at the door. She turned back, her eyes glistening with a fragile hope. "Take care of yourself, my son." When the door shut, Arman stood alone in the quiet, the echoes of their words lingering in the air. His chest ached, not with anger, but with a hollow ache. He had won, yes, but some victories carried scars no amount of triumph could erase. And so, he sat back down, staring at the untouched tea on the table. The night pressed heavy around him. Revenge had been swift, karma had spoken, but the cost was written in the tears of the only parent he had ever loved. The gap between betrayal and trust remained vast, unbridgeable, and Arman, for all his strength, knew that some wounds were destined to remain. Morning sunlight poured gently across the street where the old family restaurant once stood. Arman walked slowly, hands in his pockets, his steps measured, almost reluctant. It had been months since he last visited, yet the memories clung to the walls like old paint. Nights of exhaustion, days of humiliation, moments when laughter and betrayal had shared the same air. Now the building wore a new face. Malik's kitchen banners fluttered proudly, the glass windows polished until they gleamed. Families gathered outside waiting for tables. The scent of freshly baked naan drifted into the street, mingling with spices that promised warmth and comfort. Arman paused on the corner, watching. A small smile touched his lips. It was not triumph, not pride, but peace. The place no longer belonged to his pain. It had been reborn, and so had he. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with life. Waiters moved briskly, chefs called out orders, and laughter rose above the clatter of dishes. Arman stepped in quietly, unnoticed at first until a young hostess approached him. "Sir, welcome to Malik's kitchen. Do you have a reservation?" He shook his head lightly. "No, I was just passing by. I wanted to see how things were going." Recognition sparked in her eyes. "You're Mr. Arman, aren't you? Imran talks about you often. Please, have a seat. We'd be honored." Arman chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Thank you, but I won't stay. I just needed to see." She smiled, a little puzzled, but nodded respectfully before returning to her duties. Arman walked a few steps further inside, letting the hum of life wash over him. Children giggled at their parents' side. Couples shared quiet conversations. The restaurant, once a battlefield of betrayal, now radiated joy. He felt something inside him loosen, as though chains he hadn't known he carried were falling away. Leaning against a pillar, he allowed his thoughts to wander back. He remembered the long nights he had spent scrubbing pots, too tired to stand but unwilling to leave work unfinished. He remembered the times he offered solutions during crises, only to be dismissed with mocking words. He remembered his siblings' laughter when they took his name off the documents, the sting of betrayal sharper because it came from family. Betrayal. It was a word that had shaped his life. Betrayal from blood, the people meant to stand by him. Yet in their betrayal they had revealed their truth. Loyalty meant nothing to them. And in their greed they had written their own downfall. Arman closed his eyes briefly, breathing in the scent of spices, and whispered to himself, "Family should never have been about control. It should have been about trust." The word settled in his heart like a stone sinking into water. For months he had wrestled with anger and sorrow, wondering if his actions had been justified. But standing here now, seeing the building thrive without them, he understood something deeper. He had not destroyed his family. He had not even sought revenge. He had only stepped aside, and in that space truth had done the rest. His mother's tearful face came back to him. Her regret was real, her sorrow sincere, and though the wound she left in him could not heal quickly, he carried no hatred for her. She too had been trapped by fear, by weakness. It was his siblings' arrogance that had poisoned everything. Armand knew forgiveness might never come easily, but he had found something far greater: freedom. He turned toward the exit, slipping back onto the street. The air outside was crisp, filled with the sound of children playing nearby. He walked slowly, letting his thoughts crystallize into something he could carry forward. Life had taught him a hard truth. Betrayal from a stranger wounds the flesh, but betrayal from family scars the soul. And yet justice has a way of circling back, of balancing scales no human hand can hold steady. His siblings had mocked loyalty, treated blood as currency, and dismissed his worth. And in time they paid the price, not by his hand but by the natural order of greed devouring itself. As he strolled down the street, Armand reflected on the irony. They had erased his name to protect their pride, yet now his name was whispered with respect in business circles, while theirs had become synonymous with failure. Not because he sought revenge, but because he had chosen dignity over spite, patience over desperation. For years he had believed silence was weakness, but now he knew silence could also be strength. The quiet strength that waits, that endures, that lets time reveal what pride tries to hide. At a small park bench across the street, Armand sat for a while watching the families go in and out of Malik's kitchen. He felt no bitterness, no burning desire to boast. Instead, there was calm, like the stillness after a storm. He whispered again, almost as if speaking to his younger self. Those who disrespect loyalty will one day pay the price of their greed. Always. The words lingered, heavy but true. For Armand, the journey was no longer about revenge or even justice. It was about peace, about knowing that he had lived with loyalty, even when none was given in return. About realizing that dignity, though invisible, was the sharpest weapon of all. He stood at last, brushing the dust from his trousers, and began walking home. The city around him buzzed with life, unconcerned with the drama that had consumed his world. To them he was just another man, and that perhaps was the greatest gift of all: to live without chains, without needing validation, without proving himself to anyone. At the corner, he glanced back one last time at the thriving restaurant. His lips curved into a small, serene smile, not in gloating, not in pride, but in peace. The scars would remain, yes. The wounds of betrayal do not vanish, but scars tell stories, stories of survival, of endurance, of rising after being struck down. And Armand knew his story was not one of bitterness, but of resilience. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Armand whispered one final thought, carried away by the wind. Family should be built on trust, not control. Without trust there is no family, only strangers bound by blood. And with that he turned away from the past, walking steadily into a future that, at last, belonged fully to him.